Welcome if you're joining me on YouTube. So glad to have you. This is going to be posted later on up there, so you can check in the description below for all of the recipes and a link to all that stuff. If you're joining me live, it is so nice to see you. Whether you're planning on cooking with me or just kind of following along and making some of this stuff later on, either one is going to work. I have not baked my bread yet. Some of you have already baked the bread, so that's awesome. So the first thing I'm going to do is form it, get it in the oven, and then we'll work forward through some of the other recipes, okay? So there are some new faces out there for me. If we haven't met before, because I know some people, like through my yoga community, people have been inviting their friends. So my name is Mike. I run a YouTube channel, Move, Nourish, Heal. If you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do that. And yeah, I've just been doing these free Zoom cooking classes. It's been a little while, I'm not gonna lie. It took me a while to get this one together, but it's just a fun way to connect and see faces maybe with people that don't do yoga with me necessarily over Zoom or over YouTube. So I'm a plant-based chef. I will just do the spoiler that I am not fully vegan, okay? I still eat some animal products. I just go out of my way to make sure I get animal products that I feel ethically and environmentally comfortable with eating. That's different for everybody, but there's definitely some value to adding in plant-based, even just a couple of times a week. The statistic I've heard is if you take meat off the table 3 days a week, it's like not driving your car for the whole year. So taking it to that layer of environmental sustainability, and it's just really good for you to start to kind of mix up your diet and not just eat animal products and dairy 3, 4, 5 times a day. The other thing I wanted to say is, oh yeah, so I've just recently started my Patreon account. So if you don't know what Patreon is, that's a crowdfunding site. You can check that out also in my link tree. There's different tiers. You can give me a few bucks a month to keep creating recipes and keep creating content for YouTube. I just got that live a few days ago. Somebody already joined me. So just an option. I don't expect anything from any of you, but if you do, I've had actually many people reach out about how they can support what I'm doing on YouTube. That's the way to do it. So just you get some different tiers, offer up different benefits, and you can check that out by clicking my link tree link later on, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start by forming the bread, okay? And I have a second camera over here, so I'll just move this onto my cutting board. Come over here. I made this dough about just over an hour ago. It's already doubled in size. If you aren't making the bread, or if you haven't made it yet, there is actually a video, and it's up on my YouTube channel as well, just to show you how to make just this bread, because we didn't have time, obviously, to let it rise for 90 minutes at the beginning of the call. So I've got a baking stone here. I did test it twice on just a cookie sheet with a piece of parchment. I'll say try to make sure you use a cookie sheet that's not gonna bend or warp in the oven, okay? And just be liberal with your oil. I called this oat and olive oil flatbread for a reason. If you don't put the oil, it still turns out all right, but it's not as crispy and delicious, so. Okay, the benefit of being on these calls with me live is that you can interrupt me anytime and ask me questions. Happy to do it. So I'm just gonna dump my dough out into the middle of my sheet here. This is probably the most finicky part of this recipe, okay? Is just you have to make sure you oil your fingers well and just be patient and form this out into like a shape that's relatively thinned out. Like it's about 1/2 inch, I think I said in the recipe. It does not have gluten in it. So if you're used to working with bread and you want to like stretch this, good luck. It's not going to happen, okay? There's no gluten in there. So you really have to just kind of gingerly keep oiling your fingers and just keep pressing this out into something focaccia-like. I didn't want to call it a focaccia because we're making Spanish food and that didn't really make sense, but there's almost always some form of bread served with tapas, so. How thick you make it is really dependent on you, but if you do it a bit thicker, it'll just take longer to bake, kind of obvious, and it might not be as dried out in the center. Like you might find it's a bit gummy if it's too thick, but you don't have to be crazy about it. It does pop up a bit as it rises. We're gonna let that rise now. I'm just gonna let that rise for about 15 minutes while my oven finishes preheating. And then I will get that in the oven. I'm just gonna brush it with oil now. You can do it before or after. So just, yes, it's a lot of oil. If you don't want to put as much oil, then don't put as much oil, but it's very tasty. It's very tasty if you drench it, I can promise you. We will use quite a bit of olive oil tonight. If the amount that's in my recipes is too much, then just use a little less. It's not really dependent for most of them, but the mushrooms you want to use enough to make sure they crisp up, but that's in good time. So this is ready to go. I'm just going to set it on top of my oven. And then once I get over there to start doing the next dish, it should be ready to go in about 10 or 15 minutes. So the first thing I want to do now is I want to start on the tofu, okay? Because the tofu benefits from marinating for a little bit. So I'm going to cut this up, get it mixed with the spices, and then we will move on to to the next dish and come back to the tofu in a few minutes. So for the first one here, for the tofu, it's a marinated. A couple people have asked me, like, yes, we're replacing feta with tofu. And no, it's not going to taste like feta, okay? It's going to taste like tofu, but the marinade is pretty tasty, so it should turn out good. With tofu, you want to press the moisture out of it, okay? So if you don't have like a clean, lint-free kitchen towel, feel free to use paper towels, of course. What I'm going to do is just cut this in half down the center first to make it a bit thinner, okay? This will just make it a little easier to get the moisture out of it. And I'll set that here. And then you don't want to be too aggressive, but put some pressure, apply. There's something called a tofu press that somebody out there might have. Where it's like kind of like a weight, or even something with like where you screw it down to tighten it to press the moisture out. What this does is just gives it a bit nicer texture. If all of that moisture is still inside the tofu, it's very wet, obviously, wet inside, right? And it kind of just waters down the flavor of whatever you put on it. So that's basically all that it needs. I can feel that this is soaked through the towel. If you're crazy about pressing your tofu, press it a little longer. But for me, I just like to get most of the moisture out of it. And then I'm just going to dice this up and throw it into a bowl with the spices, okay? So the size of pieces, again, roughly, like what I'm thinking of for most of these dishes now is you want the pieces to be 1 or 2 bites, right? If you're thinking tapas, it's kind of fingery food. You don't want it to be huge chunks. So like roughly 1/2 or 3/4 of an inch cubes. Okay, and just get that into a bowl. My little spiel about tofu, people always ask, and I actually had some of you reach out to me, like Virginia reached out to me. So tofu, in my opinion, is not something that you need to avoid, but it's also not something that you want to be eating 3 meals a day, okay? So a lot of the science, from my understanding, around estrogen disruption, which is why a lot of ladies are afraid of eating tofu. From what I understand, phytoestrogens don't really affect human estrogen levels that dramatically for most people. That's not the same for everybody. But if you're getting a good quality organic tofu that's sprouted really helps to make it digestible. If you're eating it once a week or twice a week, it's not going to have a massive impact on your health. Again, check with your doctor if you've been told not to eat tofu, but most people are going to benefit from taking a little bit of space from all those heavier proteins like the meats that we eat. So that's diced up, okay? I'm going to add into here the olive oil. No, wait a minute, that's a lie. I'm just gonna add the spices. The olive oil comes a bit later. So this here, I've got all of my spices pre-measured, okay? I had the paprika, so it's 1 tablespoon of paprika, 3/4 of a teaspoon of oregano, 1/2 teaspoon to 1 teaspoon of chili flakes. That's dependent on how spicy you like your food to be. I had a whole teaspoon there. And then 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, okay? So I added all that in. I'm just gonna mix this up to kind of coat everything evenly. And then I'm going to set this aside while we make the mushrooms, okay? So I'm going to do the mushrooms first, finish the mushrooms first, and then we'll come back to the tofu. So you're just looking for something like that, nice and evenly coated in the spices, okay? And you'll just let that sit aside. So with the mushrooms, I've already cut my mushrooms up. I've learned from these past cooking classes that me demoing all the chopping is, there's just ain't nobody got time for that, as they say. I just ran out of time if I'm trying to show you all the chops. I figured that this was pretty straightforward. So if your cremini mushrooms or your brown mushrooms, and just to be clear, it can be any mushroom that you like. You can make this with any kind of mushroom, but you just want them, again, to be 1 or 2 bites, right? So I cut them all in half. If you had, I know some of the cremini sometimes can be quite large, then just like quarter them or cut them into chunks that are manageable for you to fry, okay? And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start cooking the mushrooms, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the garlic, okay? Because I didn't chop the garlic yet. That I wanted to actually talk about the different kind of chops we're gonna use instead of just like putting the garlic through a garlic press every time. There's some different reasons why you might wanna chop it a bit differently, okay? So I'm gonna move this over to the stove quickly here. My oven is almost preheated. I'm gonna set this in a second. So what you wanna do is just get a pan over like medium-ish heat. Everybody's stove is a little bit different, so it's hard to say exactly what temperature you want to set your stove to, but something where you can walk away from it and not worry about it burning in an instant. So like on my stove, that's about a 6 out of 10. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to add half the oil. I can tell that this is gonna probably be 2 batches, okay? If you want this to be the most delicious, then do this in 2 batches so you get a nice brown on your mushrooms. If you're in a bit of a rush, it's by no means gonna ruin the dish if your mushrooms aren't cooked super crispy. What I'm gonna do is add roughly half the oil. I'm just gonna cover the bottom of the pan basically. Mushrooms like oil. They soak it up like a sponge. And I'm just gonna let this heat up for a second to warm up. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna put them in the pan and then turn them all so that they're cut side down. This is optional. I get that it's a little finicky. You don't have to do it by any means, but it's just, what it basically does is the flat side of the mushroom is gonna brown the most evenly. So that's gonna make it the most delicious. Okay, so this is getting warm now. What I'm gonna do is just dump out about half, okay? I'm not gonna like set them in one by one cut side down. That seems extra silly. And then I'm just gonna go in with some tongs, okay? And flip them over. And then I'm gonna set a timer for 3 minutes and walk away. You really don't have to watch these like a hawk. It is very, very hard to burn a mushroom, okay? Like your mushrooms can get pretty dark and still taste amazing. So as long as you haven't cranked your pan up too high, you should be good to just walk away, and we'll go start on the garlic in a sec here. Okay, so that's good. You can see the pan isn't super crowded, all cut side down. You can maybe also see that most of that oil has been absorbed by the mushrooms. They really do love to soak it up. What I'll do is I'll put the bread in the oven. The second rise is not that important here, okay? We're not working with actual bread with gluten. It doesn't really need that extra puff. It does give it a little bit more lift, but it's not gonna ruin it. I just wanna get that in so it's cooked. So I'm gonna set a timer for 25 minutes. Depending on the day, it's been taking between 25 and 35 minutes every time I bake that. Let us talk about garlic. I'm actually going to do a YouTube video next week on just garlic, on how to peel, different ways to peel it, different ways to chop it. I had a friend over one time and was watching me peel garlic with like a knife, and she's like, why don't you just smash it? And like most of the time I do just smash a clove of garlic, right? I put it under my knife and crush it to get the skin off. But with something like this dish that we're doing, I want there to be like texture to the garlic. I want there to be some like visual pieces you can bite into. So especially with the garlicky mushrooms, I want the garlic to be pretty substantial, okay? So I'm gonna take it, I like garlic and I'm here eating this by myself. So I'm gonna do a full 6 cloves here. It's called garlicky mushrooms. You put it into taste, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna slice this up. It's not that complicated, but I just wanted to kind of show you the visual. 2 millimeters or so thick, okay? Sizable pieces so that when you're eating the mushrooms, it's not just mushrooms. There's actually big chunks of garlic in there that you can get a bite on. And the other reasoning behind this is a couple of things. When you have bigger pieces like this, they don't burn, right? If I just put this garlic into the pan with a garlic press, it's a good chance it's gonna burn. The flavor of garlic changes dramatically depending on how you slice it up, okay? So something like this is gonna have a much milder flavor, like it's a deeper garlic flavor, as opposed to when you put it through a garlic press, it's that really in your face, over the top, heady kind of garlic flavor, which isn't bad, right? If I'm making certain dishes, that's what I'm looking for. For something like this, I'm looking for a little bit more substantial pieces, okay? So I can show you a bit up close more. Like that's pretty chunky, right? And as it cooks, the way that this recipe, we cook it kind of slow once the mushrooms go back in the pan, it's gonna come out with a really nice, you'll have little bits of garlic you can bite into. It's got a really nice mild flavor. So that's just my little spiel about the garlic, okay? Keep an ear out for your mushrooms. You can go over there. I'm gonna go check on those. And we'll do the other garlic as we go along for what we need it for, okay? So what I'm gonna do now is that's been about 2.5 minutes, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna toss these. And they barely even brown still, okay? So that pan wasn't fully hot yet. This is fine. The other batch might brown a bit more. Turn them over. You can keep stirring them now for about another 2 minutes or so, okay? What we're looking for is as much color as we can get on them. Within reason. We don't want to take 25 minutes just browning the mushrooms. The other stuff that we need for this dish is some spices. Okay, and then the garlic that we just chopped. We don't need this quite yet, but I'm just gonna get it ready over here. Also, some sherry, okay? So I'll just talk to that quickly. If you didn't buy sherry, if you're in the States, You might have been able to buy cooking sherry. That's the thing. We don't really have cooking wine that's readily available in Canada, I feel like, as you do in the US. So you can still find it, but it's not like everywhere. Or maybe I'm just never looking for it. Who knows? But sherry is it's kind of traditional in Spanish dishes. There's a lot of different options. If you want a dry sherry, you don't want something that's super sweet. Even the sweet one will still add something to it. I've done these kind of dishes using like white vermouth. If you have a white wine that you've opened up to go along with this dish, then you could also just use any white wine. It's really not super vital. If you just want like garlicky mushrooms, you're going to accomplish that even without the sherry. But it does give a bit of depth of flavor. So these are coming along nice. Getting some color on them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer these over to a separate bowl. I'm going to get the other batch of mushrooms in here because these will finish cooking. Like the first round doesn't have to be completely cooked because they're going to go back into the pan while we cook the garlic and stuff a bit later. So I'm just going to dump these out. Add just a splash more oil over here. Okay, you might not need as much as the first round. And then add the rest of your mushrooms in there. And again, same as last time, turn all the cut sides down. These will brown up considerably more. The first batch I put in, the pan wasn't really hot enough, so. Again, this step here is not completely vital, but you will find that if you like mushrooms, this will give you the most mushroomy bang for your buck. If you don't like mushrooms, I mean, this is a pretty traditional Spanish like tapas dish, garlicky mushrooms. I'm not going to even attempt to butcher the Spanish pronunciation of it. But so, I mean, you could do this with diced up zucchini or with cauliflower. There's different things you could use for it, but it wouldn't really be, you know, the traditional dish. Make sure you got enough oil in there so that they brown. Okay, I'm going to take us back over and just start to talk through the next dish while these finish cooking. Okay, so the tofu has been sitting here, okay? The other things that I've done for this dish, just so that you're kind of caught up with me if you need to prep some stuff, I chopped up my roasted red peppers already into strips. You can buy roasted red peppers in a jar already in strips, or you can roast your own peppers and then peel them and dice them up or slice them up into strips, okay? I tend to just buy the jarred ones because for me, it's just too much work to deal with that if I'm making a bunch of dishes. If you already roasted your peppers, kudos to you. The other thing that I did, which is again optional, so I have a mix of olives here. These are like olives that I like, a mixture of them. What I did is I went through and just crushed them with the side of my knife. I have not pitted all of them because that's a lot of work, right? Like to actually you can take the pits out of all of them or you can use pitted olives. But what this will do is if I've just given them a light crush, it's just going to make all of those flavors in the marinade kind of soak into the olives a lot more deliciously, okay? So again, you can be using any kind of olive. You might already have pitted black or green olives. But if you got a mixture, if you have calamatas or like those sun-dried Moroccan olives, any of those things, just give them a light press with the side of your knife. It's really fast just to open them up a little bit. And then the other thing we need for this one is more garlic, okay? So I'm gonna do that quickly as well here. This is sliced again. I'm gonna slice it a little bit thinner. And that's just personal preference. If you don't want it, if you wanna do them all, like if you wanna kind of chop all your garlic, slice it all at the same thickness. What I like to really try to get people to understand on these Zoom calls is that recipes are just a guideline, okay? You're not gonna ruin the dish by how you chop the garlic. You could use a garlic press and it's still gonna taste pretty good. It's just like personal preference to have a bit of different texture and stuff like that. Maybe more traditional in some cases, but you know, garlic press gets the job done. You don't even have to peel garlic with some of them. Okay, so that's some more sliced garlic. It's just sliced a little bit thinner, you can see there, than the first time, okay? Just a little bit. And we will go over and check on our mushrooms again now. Well, I'll just check one of them and see how it looks. I feel like they're gonna be more brown. Yeah, there we go. So just looking for a bit more color this time. I'm gonna turn them all cut side up now. Give these a couple more minutes. And then we'll move on. I'm just gonna go double check my recipe because I'm notorious for not following my own recipe. Which if I'm being honest, I just make the recipes for you guys out there. I very rarely would use a recipe except for something baked. So what we've got going on here now, I'm gonna just, I'm going to add the mushrooms back into the pan. Let me just turn on my fan. I'm gonna add the mushrooms from the first batch, okay, back into the pan. There's going to be a bit of moisture there. That's okay. That's just moisture coming from them steam. And then I'm going to add in the seasoning. And I'm going to add in the garlic, okay? And we're just going to cook this now, stirring it pretty consistently until the garlic starts to soften up. So the seasoning that I added there was chili flakes, salt and pepper. And again, I put a whole teaspoon of chili flakes. It was half a teaspoon of salt, and then I think about a quarter teaspoon of black pepper I added. I'm just going to stay here now. I'm going to watch this pan. The salt is going to cause some moisture to come out of the mushrooms, and we want that. We don't want this pan super hot now. So if you find it's like drying out and starting to burn, just turn it down a little bit, okay? We want to give the garlic a bit of time to soften before we add in that sherry. That's the last step. We'll be adding the sherry and the parsley. So after we get this done, we will move on to doing the tofu dish. We'll complete that. I'm just going to do it in the same pan in the interest of not wasting a pan. If you've already baked your bread and you're following along with me, you can turn your oven low. After my bread comes out, I'm going to turn the oven way down to like 170 just to keep it for warming the food. So if you've already made your bread, if that's done, then just turn your oven on to like a warm setting so you can put some of this stuff aside as we go. And it doesn't need a ton of time. I don't mind the garlic to still have a bit of bite to it. We just don't want it to be raw and crunchy. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add my sherry now. This is going to help to keep cooking everything. That'll go a long way to help soften up the garlic once you've added the sherry. If you're not using sherry, it can just be a splash of water, or like I said, any wine or anything. Vegetable stock would work. And I'm just going to let this go now until most of that moisture has evaporated off of here, okay? These dishes are pretty simple. They pack a lot of bang for their buck. There's lots of lots of flavor in here. So that's looking good. I'm going to add the parsley to this right now. It'll be a little less green when we go to serve this later on, but it'll still be tasty. So this is going to be 2 tablespoons of flat leaf parsley chopped up. I'll just stir through. And I'm going to call this done now. I'm going to transfer this to a dish, and I'll set it aside, and we'll move on to the tofu. All right, so that's what you're looking for. Something tasty. Feel free to have a taste. If you find that it's not quite cooked enough, if the garlic isn't cooked enough for you, then just leave it on there for a little bit longer. And yeah, get another pan ready, or if you're using the same pan like I am, just give it a quick rinse. You don't have to wash it thoroughly. Just get any kind of stuff that's stuck to the bottom off of there. And then we're going to move on to the tofu dish, okay? So I'm just going to quickly get that out here. So what you're going to do now is heat up some oil over medium-low, okay? And you don't want to have this too hot at this point. If your pan's still wet, dry it out before you add the oil, or that will cause lots of sputtering. So it's going to be, I think it's 3 tablespoons. Yeah, 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. So eyeball that. Turning down the pan, if you didn't do it yet, turn it down. So medium-low, not too hot. And the first thing to go in here is that garlic that I just sliced, okay? So the slightly less thick sliced garlic. We're just gonna sweat this out, cook it until it starts to soften a bit. And you can start to bring over some of the other stuff for this if you're cooking along with me here. So I'm gonna bring over the tofu that we have marinating. Set my mushrooms aside for now until the oven's ready. Keep stuff warm. I've also got my olives and my roasted peppers. And a couple more tablespoons of the dry sherry, okay? So again, I'll keep repeating myself, it is optional. In this case, I would add something to replace it. If you're not using the sherry, you definitely need some kind of a moisture here to add some consistency, like to add some bulk to the marinade, some like, you know, what's going to be coating everything. So that's 2 tablespoons.
Would you use lemon juice again? Sorry.
Yeah, you can use lemon juice for sure. That's going to add some brightness to it. It's really like you're like, I'm not going to lie, like lemon juice is not going to taste the same as sherry, but you just want something that's got a little bit of a kick to it. Like sherry's not really acidic, but it adds some depth of flavor. Lemon juice will add some depth of flavor as well. It's not going to be a bad option, just different for sure. Okay, so what I've got here is the garlic is going, it's just barely starting to lightly brown, okay, which is fine. You don't want it to get dark, but if you see a little bit of color coming to it, that's fine. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to add my tofu in here now, okay? And what I wanted to do is I'm not trying to like brown my tofu by any means. All I wanna do is basically get it kind of coated in the oil. So I'm gonna just add that in. I'm gonna turn the heat up a little bit, but I don't want it to be like blazing hot so it starts burning on and smoking and all that kind of stuff. Just enough to get things kind of going here. You can toss, that's really the best way. Or just be careful, use a spatula or something so you're not crushing the tofu up too much. Again, this is a pretty fast dish, so all that we're trying to do is warm this through essentially. One thing that I keep talking about on these calls is just to remind everybody, when you're cooking plant-based, you don't have to be really as concerned about food safety. Like there's not cross-contamination when there's no raw meat products, right? So you can eat tofu cold out of the package if it's not expired. Like, I mean, even past expiry, if I cook tofu, I'm not worried about the expiry date. If it smells fine, I'm not gonna throw it in the garbage. But with raw tofu, like you just basically at this point, we're just trying to get it warmed through. Same with the olives and the peppers. It doesn't have to be like browned. Okay, so I'm already comfortable with that. Everything's nice and coated. I'm gonna add in my peppers. I'm gonna add in my olives. I'm just gonna stir that through, and then I'll add my sherry. Just adding in the sherry here. Giving it a toss. You just want to let the alcohol burn off with that, okay? And then all that this needs now is some parsley. These go pretty fast if you've got everything pre-chopped. And even still, like actually, when I was doing these recipes, I was trying to keep it pretty straightforward so that we can actually accomplish everything within the time here. So this looks good to me. I'm gonna add the parsley to it. That's that. Okay, this one's also done. That's basically what you're looking for. Everything coated, everything nice and heated through. Because I know I'm putting this into a warming oven in a few minutes, right? Like I don't need it to be, it's gonna stay warm in the oven, right? It'll finish heating itself through if the tofu's not fully heated through. So just transfer this to a dish. And then we will move on to the last one. Check on the bread here, actually. We're a few minutes away from the bread being done. And you can use this same pan to do the last dish as well. I prefer to do it a little bit more in a pot, just so it's easier to stir through the spinach afterwards, but it's easily can be done in the same pot. Just give your dish a wipe if it looks like a disaster, like mine just did there. All right, so we've got that, This final dish here is another one that's a pretty traditional tapas dish. Like definitely a traditional, if you're a vegetarian and you've gone for tapas, you've probably seen spinach and chickpeas. Great ways to get protein in, okay? So like with the chickpeas and with the tofu, this is gonna be a pretty significant tofu source, a pretty significant source of protein. So we'll just come over here. The last thing that I need to do is chop the garlic for this last dish. So let's bring the camera back. This last one is actually just chopped garlic, okay? And that, if something says minced garlic or finely chopped garlic, that would be the time that I would use a garlic press. This says roughly chopped. You can totally use a garlic press for this. So again, because I'm not looking for there to be like really sizable pieces. It's more about having pieces that are big enough that they're not going to burn. Pressed garlic will burn very fast in a hot pan, right? Because it's such small pieces. So I'm just going to use up the remainder of the garlic that I have here. This is definitely a garlicky dinner tonight. And then I'm just going to roughly chop this. So I'm going to go through it with the knife one direction. I'll go over it the other direction. And then just go back and forth a couple of times. Keep putting it into a pile and just kind of going through it with your knife. If you have one of those garlic chopping devices, like I feel like this is like, there's probably nothing with more kitchen gadgets than garlic, right? Like how to deal with garlic, peeling garlic, chopping garlic, mincing garlic. You can do all of them with a knife, but it's definitely a sticky, smelly job. My hands will smell like garlic now for the rest of the night. Interesting tip, if you don't already know it, stainless steel will remove the smell of garlic from your hands. So you can like rub your fingers on the inside of the kitchen sink with some dish soap on your hands, and that'll help to get rid of the garlic smell. They even sell garlic soap, which is just a piece of stainless steel that you can like shape like a piece of soap. I actually think I have a piece of that somewhere. Yeah, there it is. This is actually called a garlic soap. So it's just a piece, magic soap it's called. It's just a piece of stainless steel that you put a drop of dish soap on it and wash your hands with it, and it removes the smell of garlic from your hands. It really does work. If that's the thing that bothers you. It also works to just rub your fingers on the inside of the kitchen sink and not buy an extra gadget, but you know, take you back over to the stove. So I've got a pot going again. This can be in a frying pan. That's easier if that's what you got. Add your garlic. The heat is over, again, medium-low here. You don't want it to be super hot or medium, depending on your stove. And we're just going to let that saute to soften it up a little bit. The other things that we need for this dish are some chickpeas. So I use the smaller can for this recipe, right? Like the 14 ounce or the 398 400 ml can. If you have a big can, you can add more chickpeas. I would just say add more seasoning to it as well if you're going to do that. Or just keep the other half of the can for something else. That's some vegetable broth, some sea salt. I've got 2 tablespoons of paprika. This is a very paprika-centric dish. They use, like my experience when I was in Spain, as well as just kind of looking through recipes when I was developing these, is that there is no shortage of paprika used in Spanish cooking. If you did not already know that. It's kind of their thing. So we're just going to let that soften for a minute. It doesn't need to cook for that long. You really, again, I put in the recipe this time, don't burn the garlic. When you have it chopped up more finely, it's much more likely to burn. You just don't want, like onions can brown and they taste more delicious. If you brown garlic, it tends to get this very bitter, acrid flavor that's not desirable. So just be careful of that. Actually, this is good timing because the timer is about to go off on the bread. So let's just check on that. 25 is kind of the minimum. I'll be surprised if it's fully done yet. Yeah, it doesn't look quite browned enough yet, but it looks like it did pop up a little bit more. Okay, so it's not quite there yet. I'm going to give it another 5 minutes, and I'm actually going to, I didn't realize when I put it in, I had my oven rack set to the very bottom. It's more ideal to cook it in the middle of the oven, to bake in the middle of the oven, so I just put mine back in at the top, which should hopefully balance things out here. So this is probably there. I'm just going to check and see, like, yeah, I can kind of push my spoon through one of the bigger pieces of the garlic. So it's going to be soft enough already. Next, I'm going to add the paprika and just stir it through. Okay, it's nice to get it mixed into the oil before we add everything else. So this is going to make like a beautiful, nice deep red oil. You don't need to cook that for any length of time. I'm just going to go right through and add in the chickpeas now. This brand, if you can find Eden Organics, you might have seen this in the grocery store. They cook their beans with kombu, which is a kind of seaweed. This kombu has been used in Japan for like centuries as a way to cook beans. And what it does is there's something in there that breaks down, there's an enzyme in the kombu that breaks down the compound in the beans that makes you super gassy. So if you get really bloated from beans, if you maybe have that story that you don't like
Mike.
Chickpeas and stuff. I have a like night and day difference if I buy that brand of chickpeas. I don't make any money from eating organics, just to be clear. But is there a question out there? Did somebody pop in? Oh.
Yeah, sorry, I missed what you put in after the garlic.
After the garlic, I added the paprika, 2 tablespoons of paprika. Also, hi, honey, I love you. Nice to hear your voice. 2 tablespoons of paprika, and then I just stirred that through the oil, and then I added the chickpeas in right after. So it's like
Okay.
you don't have to cook the paprika for any length of time just to get it warmed up.
All right, it's
All right,
very
so
red. Cool. Thank you.
perfect. So good. Okay, so I've added the chickpeas. I'm gonna add in the other ingredients here. Okay, I'm gonna add in the vegetable broth. I'm gonna add in the sea salt, and I'm just letting some of that moisture cook down here now. So you can turn up the heat to get that to boil a little bit harder. Okay, so the last thing that has to happen then is the spinach. So in the picture that was at the top of the link where you found your recipes, I made it with kale, okay, because I had kale in my fridge that day. The traditional is spinach. It's chickpeas with spinach is the dish, but you can use any green just for future reference. This is arguably one of the easiest dishes to make, right? Like it's like what, 5 ingredients or 6 ingredients, 7 ingredients, I guess. But yeah, it's very tasty. It's very tasty. Well, in my opinion, I enjoyed it when I've made these. I've made these a few times now just to make sure that they work out more or less. And I wasn't complaining. So I've just turned up my heat. I'm gonna let that kind of simmer. What time are we at? I feel like we've like blasted through this way fast. Now we're like doing the opposite. Oh no. Okay. Wait. Oh wait. Yeah. 6:30. We're supposed to be done. Oh, at 8. We got 45 minutes. Yeah. I've like done this too fast this time. This is great. We'll have time to chat after. I'm actually gonna make the gazpacho too, just to demo it, which is just basically putting everything into a blender. We can talk about the difference. Spanish gazpacho is not spicy. Okay, so that's kind of a misconception that like Mexican gazpacho will have jalapenos in it often, even some cayenne pepper, things to make it kind of hot. And it's not like kind of cool, refreshing, but also spicy. The Spanish one it's a bit thicker. They use bread to thicken it, which they do sometimes in the Mexican one as well. But I've made this using a little piece of that oat flatbread, and it works out just fine. And also the difference, the distinguishing kind of thing is there's a little bit of cumin in it. I don't often see cumin in a Mexican gazpacho. So this is now coming, it's nice. The paprika is gonna thicken up kind of into like a sauce almost with that vegetable broth. So I'm actually kind of happy with how much that's evaporated already. I don't know if you guys can see that at the bottom there. It just makes it kind of like, it's thick. It's not just liquid anymore. So I'm gonna add my spinach in. Stir that through. All you're essentially having to do here is wilt this down now, okay? So I'm just gonna keep stirring until the spinach is wilted. What a difference how much time was saved by me chopping everything. Okay, so that's done as well, okay? You can see that there's a little bit of sauce at the bottom, not too much. It's not like soaking wet, but just something you can soak up with your bread. I'm gonna transfer this to a serving dish. We just like nailed through those recipes. I purposely made them very easy, but I don't know. Hopefully everyone out there is somewhat there with me. Got all 3 of those done before the bread even baked. And there's no dishes on my counter. Winning. The first cooking class I did was literally like somebody set a bomb off in my kitchen, so this has come a long way. I know I've had the feedback from some people that have been doing these cooking classes that it looks like a bomb went off in their kitchen after they're done them, but that's part of the lesson, learning how to multitask in your kitchen. Okay. So gazpacho. If you don't have like a high-speed blender, like a Vitamix or a like a Blendtec, if you're one of those poor suckers out there, and I'm just gonna throw it out there, if you're one of those poor suckers that bought that Ninja blender, I'm sorry, okay? I had one too, they're horrible. They don't work. It's not a blender, it's a tall food processor, and it will never ever blend something smooth. It's like marketing genius by them because they made something that looks like it's gonna chop really well, but they just don't work. So, sorry. I had one before I got my Vitamix. I use it every day. And what I'm trying to get at the long-winded way, again, I don't make money from Vitamix, but I highly endorse getting one. If you want to cook healthy, it just really makes it easier to make a lot of dishes. Something like this gazpacho, you can make it in a regular blender or in a bullet, absolutely. You just have to you have to mix it a lot longer generally. Like in a Vitamix, I can have this turned into like a smooth puree in a matter of 15 to 20 seconds. In a normal blender, it might take you like a minute. Even a little longer. And in that Ninja, you can just let it run for 5 minutes and you're still going to have like little bitties in there that you'll have the texture of. That's just never going to get smooth. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. I also got suckered into it at Canadian Tire. I understand. It was on sale. It looked so sharp. It looked so good, but no. I'm going to check the bread. I feel like that should be almost there now. Yes, I'm happy with this. So when you check it, it should be like sizzly. I don't know if I can get the sizzle visual. There's like, can you see kind of, there's like oil bubbling up and it's sizzling. I don't know if you can see that. I'm just gonna put down a trivet here. What you can do, if the bottom is nicely browned, you're probably in good shape. So if you have heat-proof fingers, you can just kind of lift it up. You can see that it's kind of browned a little bit. I'm going to throw this back in for another few minutes just while I make the gazpacho. You're better off, like I said in the recipe, you are better off to overbake this than to underbake it, okay? If you underbake it, it'll kind of be like crispy on the outside, like oatmeal on the inside. Something that if you are not aware, just a little side note, any baked good that has oats in it, oats actually help keep baked goods moist longer. So like any like loaf or any cake, if you add a bit of oatmeal to it, it'll stay on like at room temperature, it will stay moist and fresh a little bit longer than if it's just flour in it. But that being said, whenever baked goods are still hot that have oatmeal in them, they're very, very gluey and gummy inside until they cool down. So this bread, if you eat it hot out of the oven, it's crispy and it's tasty, but like the texture inside is kind of reminiscent of oatmeal. It's a little bit like gooey. Once it cools down to room temperature, that texture does improve a lot. So just be aware of that, okay? My mom just recently made a pumpkin loaf that was made with just oats, and I was kind of skeptical, and I told her just let it cool down, and she said it was amazing. So I'm still yet to test the recipe out and see how it goes, but just with oats is pretty good. So I'm using my Vitamix. Whatever you have, whatever blending device you have, you can make this in a food processor. It's just not going to be as good, okay? It's not going to be as smooth. So I have, I actually have one of these loaves of flatbread that I froze just to test out how it is frozen. It's actually great. That just defrosted to room temperature like half an hour ago. So side note, you can also freeze that flatbread. Turns out fine. All bread is actually really easy. Like it's good to freeze. You can freeze bread. It's better than to try to keep it on your counter. You freeze it the day you get it, pull it out as you need it. Everything else I'm just gonna dump in here, okay? So this is 2 to 3 ripe tomatoes. I've got a small red pepper diced up. I've got half of a cucumber. You can peel that if you're wanting it to be even more red in color. Spanish gazpacho traditionally has green pepper, not red pepper, but I'm not a big fan of green pepper. I find it very hard to digest, so I'm using the red. And then a couple of green onions and a clove of garlic that was just smashed. The more, like if you have a Vitamix, you just need the pieces to be manageable. If you have a blender that's not as high powered, the more finely you chop, like not finely, but if you chop things up a bit smaller, it just gives your blender a bit of an advantage. The other couple things that have to get added in here, so I've got some sea salt and a bit of cumin, just a 1/4 teaspoon of cumin. I've got some extra virgin olive oil. Again, it's the theme of the meal. And then the last thing here, so sherry vinegar is something that I often will have around. Where are we for the camera? Yeah, so sherry vinegar, there's all kinds of different brands. Okay, this is a French one. It's like Velux. It's different. It's kind of different than red wine vinegar or apple cider vinegar. There's a different kind of taste to it. Obviously, they use sherry in lots of dishes, right? The sherry, this is vinegar made out of the same sherry, essentially. You can add lemon juice if you don't have this, or apple cider vinegar is probably closer to the sherry vinegar than lemon juice would be, but either one will work. And that's it. I'm just going to blend this now until it's smooth. All right, so this, just going to start low. all we need with a Vitamix here. It's definitely, the color is not like vibrant red like you might be expecting. It's because of the cucumber, and it's because of just the fact that the bread is in there. It's going to aerate it a little bit, but that's essentially what you're looking for. It's kind of thick. If you find it's too thick, you might have added too much bread. Add a little bit more water to it, or add another tomato if you have a tomato on hand. And you can serve it drizzled with a little bit of extra virgin olive oil if you haven't gotten enough olive oil into your system yet today. All right, I'm going to take out my flatbread. We'll check on that. And then I think that I just did this in like an hour, which is crazy. I was not expecting it to be so fast. Yeah, this is better now. I can tell already. So just a little bit more color on it. And the bottom will be just a little bit more brown. The lighting is, but it's definitely browned enough now. It feels crispy. If you can feel like, if you can tell that it's got that crispiness to the outside of it, it should be good on the inside. And yeah, so let's pull everything over here. Actually, I'm gonna probably reheat some of this in a little bit because I didn't get it into my oven to keep it heated up. It's too fast. It was too fast for myself. Let me just get everything out. We'll go through it quickly, and then you can take yourselves off mute and chat. It's so good that we got it done so fast. All right. So that was like 5 dishes in an hour. We've got these two, the chickpeas and spinach. We've got the marinated tofu, olives, and roasted peppers, the garlicky mushrooms. So yeah, your gazpacho can be like in a little dish. It can be in something you can drink